We create tools and improve processes. So each developer would be different. They all have different source files. They all have their own tools, their own engines, and we have to adapt to that. So the source files change per game. We have to develop our own tools to make sure that we can scale various markets and improve the process along the way. Make sure it's getting better and reducing costs for our customers who would be the game developers. So we would work in all project functions to ensure quality and to ship the best product. So we work with the PM, the audio guys, test, and we'll go into that in more detail in the next slide. Okay, so the engineering role, me as an engineer, I would be in the centre of it, so I'm dealing with everybody. The PM would be, he or she would be overseeing the schedule, so they would be involved day to day with what. They will be involved day to day with what's going on in the project from the schedule point of view. So I would work with them on locked milestones. So when is the game going to be certified? When is content going to be complete? When is the game going to be released? So that I know what I'm working towards. We would discuss issues affecting the schedule, anything that might come along that might hinder us, say vendor breaks, holidays, whatever might impede the schedule from us moving along. We would also then provide word counts. So we would get a game in and we would analyse the source material and see how much word count there is to translate, and then we would be able to filter that back to the PM, who would provide word counts and costs to the developers. So how much is their localization of in-game text going to cost them? So we'd work with test. So once we translate the game, we would get those assets and put the assets back into the game and build the game so the test can test it. We would help them with lock bugs and fixing them, and support them with tools, any tools that they need to work on the game. Audio, as you know, we manage the translation of the voiceover script. So we would get that in normally in a spreadsheet. We have a tool that does a lot of it for us, puts it in a nice format, it's translatable, that then gets sent out, and we would then manage that, get that back in, create a script, then goes out to the studios. And then we would integrate the WAV files, the localized audio content, back into the game so that it can be tested. Microsoft Game Studio in Redmond, they would give us access to the developers, so that's how we would have our communication with the devs. So I would be communicating day in, day out, and they'd be sending me files, there'd be questions going back and forward. So that's how we communicate with them. They would branch us with the developers in whatever studio they are, in the UK, Australia, America. So they would also have the higher level schedule, so they can stop a project. So some of the projects that I work on, you're working on them, and then the next minute they're stopped for a couple of months. So that would filter down from MGS right now. Then obviously, like I said, we work with the developers. So it's my goal really to get the game localized for them, and not all developers really know how to do that. So we would work closely with them, analyze their source files, try and get the in-game content into, like I said, a localizable friendly format that makes it easy for us to localize and reduce our costs. Some of the formats that we get for them are unbelievable, but sometimes they can't change that. So if we can work with them at best and educate them, it means then if there's a V2, we've built that relationship and things are a lot easier along the way. Translation vendor is an obvious one, so we would work with the translators to get the game translated. Answer any queries, provide context. If we can. Some, like was mentioned earlier, some games it's just not possible to provide context. Some of the developers are very secretive about their work, so it's kind of, this is as much as we can give you, do what you can. Translators have to be very creative. It's just that's just the way of it. Sorry. So Tokyo team, was mentioned earlier, we're MGS Ireland, there's an MGS Tokyo. We would worry about all the EMEA languages, Europe, Middle Eastern, and Asia. They worry about Japanese, Chinese, Korean. So they would have identical engineers over there that would be doing the same as us. So we would work with them and tie our schedules together. We would use their time zone as an advantage. So a lot of the developers maybe would be in the States. So the guys in Japan would see the files before we would. And it means they can prepare them for us coming in the morning to get them done. So especially in games where the schedule is very tight, we would then use Tokyo as a basis of getting the source files into what we call EDVs. And I'll explain what an EDV is later on. And then our tools team in Dublin, so we have a dedicated tools team that we could use if we need anything. A lot of the engineers will be tech savvy and can write their own scripts, but there's sometimes with time constraints and bigger projects where we need something that a dedicated tools team can work on. Okay, so pre-production, that's obviously before we would get the game. Depending on how big the game is, that can be 6 to 12 months before the game even starts. If it's an XBLA title, it could be maybe a month or two, sometimes a couple of days. It all depends, the schedules are all up and down. So it is very important for us in that stage to engage with the developer. The more time we spend, and better that time spent, the easier the translation will be. So we would have streamlined the process, we would upscale engagement with the developers, and discuss what will be localised in the game. So ideally we would have a kick-off meeting. If we can, we'll have that in person. So we will get to meet the developers, we will get to meet who we'll be working with in MGS Redmond. Doesn't always happen, but it helps the project if we can. So we would discuss what lockwork is to be done. Does audio need to be done? In-game graphics, how are they handling their text? Lock Studio capability. So Lock Studio is the tool that we use. I'll explain that later on. So what we would try and do with the developer is get their source file to be compatible with our translation program as much as possible. So like I said earlier, creation of tools. We would get the source file and see what it looks like. Sometimes the source files are XML, which is great. Love reading XML. Sometimes they're text files, sometimes they're databases. You know, it can be a complete mess. And sometimes the developers won't shift. They've been doing it that way, they will continue to do it that way. You fix it. So that's kind of what we're up against. So the more time we have before we see the game, before the schedules kick in, we can figure out our processes and get the game translated. So obviously talk about code pages, where it's going to be translated to, the fonts, what fonts are they using, are they supported, the likes of Greek, what are we going to do if your font doesn't support Greek. One of the games we were working on, we actually had to manually create the glyphs for Greek languages. Other times we just use a different font. But we try and have those discussions in the pre-production stage so it doesn't come up a couple of days before the games are released. Oops, you know they're not supported. So like resourcing of files, find out what is being localized, how are they going to give us these files, what formats are they going to be in, how often do they change. Like I said, sometimes they're not standardized file formats. We get spreadsheets sometimes. So that would be ideal for a studio, but normally the text in a game isn't structured very well. So it's not laid out logically. So the developers will just stuff strings into the bottom as they think of them. So in a spreadsheet it doesn't read as well as it would a script. So standardized formats like spreadsheets, we have actually a tool to pull it out of a spreadsheet and fire it into XML. We would talk about builds. So obviously builds is a very important thing. If we can create our own private builds, that's awesome, because with the different time zones, so if I'm working today, I'll send off the files to the American developers will process them tonight. They'll give us a build, and then Tokyo will process it. And you see, so we have to wait basically until tomorrow. So if we're tight in the schedule, and we have a load of bug fixes, and the schedule can't move, it means we're losing a day. So if there's the ability to create private builds, we build it ourselves. That means then we can quickly fix and we don't need to worry about the developer. They can go and do their own thing, and they don't need to worry about keep giving us builds every day. And then the other thing is, if the game's huge, that's the, you know, if we're getting it from America, you're talking about whatever, 30k a second for a 3 gig game. It takes its time. Keyboard support, what are they going to be supporting on the Xbox, or if it's the PC? Dynamic UI, so discuss how they're handling the UI. So we traditionally would say 30% increase in the UI to handle languages like German, you know, with the words we get a lot. So we've discussed this as early as possible because it's very hard to fix at the end. What happens, what I'm noticing a lot is if it hasn't been handled properly, it's one of the first things to be truncated. Then they would either truncate, or the translators have to come up with a translation out of whatever. Be creative, and that kind of affects quality. So we would discuss this as much as possible before the game. The more that we can do here, the better, as you can see. Any questions? No? Okay. So production, obviously that's where we will translate the game. We create what's called the lock kit, and that contains our EDB. So EDB basically is a database that stores our strings and our translations for them. And I'll go into that in more detail. Any material that we can give them. So when we get a game, the developers will give us maybe walkthroughs, a story, cheats, whatever they can. And we'll provide the translators with as much as we can to give them a bit of context. Previous glossaries. So if the game has been localized before, if it's a second version or a DLC, we might be able to auto-translate some of that stuff. So we'll provide them with previous glossaries or glossaries of similar games that they can look at and see, okay, this was the translation that was used, to make sure the terminology stays uniform throughout different variations of games. And screenshots as well, we can do that there. So create the EDBs and break it up into logical, manageable sizes. So for games like Fable that have huge amount of lines, we would split the EDB up so that multiple translators can work on it at any one time. When we have maybe about 20 languages or 5 or 20, splitting the EDB up is important because obviously of the different schedules that we would have, it means more people can work on it, we can get it back quicker, and everyone's happy. So translation of the UI strings. So obviously any in-game text has to be translated. The only thing we wouldn't translate is credits, so we would leave that out. Everything else that the user was presented with has to be localized. So, from voiceover, subtitles, the actual menu strings, the different instructions, help, and rich presence strings, which you would see from the Xbox. If you look at the profile, what are they playing? Those kind of strings also get translated. So vendor management as well. We would coordinate the handoffs and the handbacks with the translators. So we would hand off the files to them and give them, say, 5 days to translate, whatever it is. And then we would get them handbacks and we would send them to the developers, get them into the builds, and the testers would then work on testing. We would get them lock bugs, and again, it's hand back, hand off. So we hand off to the translators, they do what they need to do, and hand back. Sometimes that can be a pain because we can't do anything while it's with the translators. So it's kind of annoying for us. I've had to hold back updates because the EDBs are with the translators, and it would get too confusing, there'd be too many versions, so it's maybe something to look at. Obviously answer queries as well. Translators they normally send a spreadsheet of queries, what is this string, what is the context of this, and we'll try and answer as much as we can. Unfortunately I don't get to play the games as often as I would like to, so we would then communicate with the test, or the PMs, or if worse comes to worse, we'll send it back to the developer if we know what the context is. So during that, we'll create localized builds for tests. So as we get translations in, we'll fire off a lock build to the test team. And what we will do beforehand is create what we call a pseudo lock build. And we don't do this all the time, but it just basically pre-translates the database with garbage characters, but it means you can check both the symbols and that all the strings are translated. So then after translation, we would put those lock assets into builds and obviously package them up for test. We'd help test with the database for storing bugs, and obviously bug fixing, and then handing back the lock assets to the developers. So once everything is complete and it has been tested that all the strings are localized, everyone's happy, we'll hand that back to the developer. Any questions?
Well, I have a question. How do you segment translation units into sentences, or how do you get them ready? When you prepare material for translation, so how do you segment translation units? Field level or sentence level?
It tends to be, that's at the developer discretion. So how they store the text is how we send it for translation. So I'm going to speak about it later, but concatenation would be something like that, where the developer will break up and then put it back together in the game. That's a pain. That's not really good for us, but normally they'll translate full sentences will be in the EDB and they'll translate away. And what we try and do is get the developers to give them IDs that are meaningful. So help, credit, text, or something like that, or this is a sword for a warrior, so that they can see from the ID. And we also have a field for instructions. So if there's anything else, the developer, if they have the time, will give very detailed instructions on each string or in a group of strings. And we provide that all in there. So basically we handle these strings as they're given by the developer. Sometimes we'll do a bit of engineering with them. So some of the strings that I'm working with would have HTML embedded in them, and not all translators would be tech savvy, know that the tags have to stay there. So what we can do is placeholder them. You'll run them through a script, it'll take the HTML out and stick at 0, 1, 2, 3, and put it back in. It also makes it much more readable for the translator. They don't want to see HTML. So yeah, we will do some things to try and help it, but the strings come from the developer, and that's how we'll go back.
And also one more thing, we require translators to use special CAT tools, or just they are free to choose? You have this requirement.
What?
I
Use what tools?
Translators to use certain CAT tools, like Trados or whatever, or they are free to choose.
Well, for games we would use Lock Studio. I don't know if you're aware of that. I'll be downloading it later, but yes, Trados would be used, not so much for games, but it's great for HTML-based files. It's good for XML as well. No, we would use Lock Studio because we have a lot of, we've used it for a long time, a lot of extensions in there that help us get statistics and stuff. So it's a pretty good interface. They can go in and, there's a lot of rules that we can put in to make sure translation doesn't get broken. And yeah, it's pretty much, it's like a spreadsheet, but it's more controlled. So that's how they would see it at the table and make it translated.
David, when you say you can do nothing from the string throughout the translation, do you break nothing to chunks so that there's not too much time you're doing nothing, or do you do with the chunks that make sense?
Well, what we endeavour for is the developers to provide us with final content. So we would tend not to kick localization in until content's complete.
Okay.
But come on, they never make that deal, and when they do, they then change it continuously every day. So the changes normally happen come the end, because that's when the lock bugs are coming in and they'll realise, oh, we don't have a string for this, or this doesn't make sense in that language, we're going to have to change it. So they tend to come at the end. We have the bulk of the translations already done.
Yeah.
So for games I'm working on, you're talking a couple of strings.
Right.
But sometimes it can get lost. The developer will send an email and go, oh, here, can you fix this? I can't do anything because it's out, and I have to store that and remember it. And sometimes it can be a pain with the versions of the EDVs, getting it back. Have I put them in? Sometimes you get translations through emails. If it's just one string, and there's no point sending out an EDV just for that. We'll send it out to vendors. Can you just translate this one string and get it back to us? And then I'll manually put it in myself. But yeah, if there's a lot of changes, there isn't much we can do. Because it's not easy to get what they translated previously, and if someone else has translated the new stuff, and merge them into one. We could do it, but it's not ideal.
Eric?
Yeah?
Can you please explain in a bit greater detail how you extract the text from the game itself into the log kit? Because the log kit differs, sometimes it's an Excel sheet, for example, divided into classes. This, for example, is inventory, this is NPCs and something. And some log kits are just text files that doesn't make a lot of sense. So what's the process?
Yeah. Well, we would get those files from the developers, so we tend not to worry a lot about how they get into the game. Because like I said, the developers use so many different ways. Some of them are text files and then they import them into an in-game database and stuff. Or it's an XML that's read directly by the game. We're not always sure how they use it. But what we would do is we get those files in the raw format. However it's read by the game. Like I said, it could be a text file. One of the games I'm working on is just a single text file. It's just named dictionary. So, and like, fair enough, the developer's nice, he put comments in there, but it's basically ID, string. So that's really where we come in to try and make it a lock-friendly format, as I would say. So if we get a wide format, like all strings are in the same file, so if it's French, Italian, German, they're all in the same file, we'll pull them out into separate files. And we'll put them into an XML format, we'll give it an ID, we'll give it the actual text and instructions if we can. And then the translators don't see that. Well, they do. They would see it inside the EDV. The EDV is just like a spreadsheet view. It's all done in the back end. So we would have those XML files or INI files, INF files, whatever they are. We have them. they're presented in a table format, so ID, string, translation, and they'll work through. So they don't need to worry about the source files. It's us that needs to engineer the solutions. So I had to write a script to pull the files out of the notepad, the text document, in the XML file, and then I had to write a script to put it back in again. So basically, whatever the developer gives us, we give them a translated version of it, identical, because we don't know how they read the file or what they do. One of them I sent back had a tab on the end of it, and it broke their script, because their script read it in a certain way that other tab maybe was a magic new language that they hadn't thought of. So those kind of things, we just try and get the source file back to the developer, and then they tend to have their own tools to put them in. Now, ResX format, which is built in Visual Studio and XNA, that kind of format is good because the developers can just pull that straight into their projects, and then we can pull that and we have a parser just to read that straight off and write back to it. So we don't have to do any in between, but usually there's some engineering to get the source file into a translatable format.
And when you do some stuff, do you make it more like user translated friendly? You consult the translators. I mean, you just mentioned, for example, there's a bunch of like tags or special codes like / something.
Yeah.
And you extract that for translation, not to worry about it. But
Yeah.
sometimes that means something like font, for example, like
Yes.
bold italics, or it's like break of the line, or it's like an empty paragraph that will be inserted. And if translators don't see it, or don't know what that tag means,
Yeah.
they can screw up the whole translation.
Yeah, well that actually happened. It didn't screw it up, it meant that there was font tags, and there was then a font tag and an image tag, so it would show an image like a coin, and then buy so many for so many coins. Because because I had changed all the HTML, it meant that was all moved around, so the image was outside the font, and half the text was one color. But the reason I did it was because to just get most of the database translated. Because it's easier to move around the HTML than it is to fix it if a tag is missing or if there's been a spelling mistake. So if I can maintain the HTML in the file, even though it might not be the right way around, it means that the translator, it's a lot easier for the read. Some of these HTML strings were really complicated, and then there was the in the middle. And you just don't want that to come in. So I scrape it all out and put a 0 there, 0 to 1, and then I just put it back in. So then if there's bugs that are logged from the translators, or the testers that see this isn't the right way, then we would deal with it. In a case like that there, sometimes they're not that complicated, and I can see where it should be. So like for the Japanese string, the actual text was outside the font tag, and all I have to do is put it back in again, because I know which strings I've changed. So yeah, we try and help the translators the best that we can. We put the HTML back in at one point, so we get the main EDB done, and then I'll put it back in, and then they can fix bugs as they see fit.
And do you yourself know what the text means usually, in most cases, when getting text from developers?
If I see the text, yeah, in English, yeah, I know what it means.
No, not the text, the tags. Like
Oh, sorry, the tags?
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Because we sometimes ask our publishers or our customers, what would that tag mean? And they sometimes say, well, we don't know. because it means sometimes it is a word, and if you just eliminate it, then you translate it like absolutely differently, and you will not be able to move something around so as to fix it. You will have to retranslate it.
Yeah.
So we usually require like what each specific tag means for us to know it, and sometimes they just fail to answer that question.
Yeah, so sometimes we'll get tags that are custom tags. So if the file is then being read by XML, that tag might mean something that will refer to some HTML. So yeah, if I don't know what it means, I'll have to ask the developer, because I then don't know what to do with it. Should it be moved around, or what happens? So yeah, we would have those questions with them. If we see the file early, then we can skim through it and go, right, what's that one? And then we know, and it means if you do that early, if the developer changes it or adds a new one, they'll tell you, by the way, there's a new tag in here. So yeah, there is cases where we don't know what they mean. But in HTML, it's sometimes pretty self-explanatory. Especially if it's an image tag, sometimes it's pretty good at naming them. So you know what image it means. And in the context of the string, sort of have a fair idea what the game is going to be. If it's talking about coins or, you know, that kind of thing. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks.
Anybody else? Okay, so post-production. So the game translated. There is still work that would be going on. The likes of demos, DLCs obviously is a big thing. So quite a lot of games now seem to have 2 DLCs, and they release pretty soon after the game to keep that interest. So, you know, the likes of...
The downloadable content.
Oh, sorry, yeah. DLC, yeah, sorry, downloadable content. Just stop me if I start waffling acronyms and you don't know what they are.
That was the type, was it?
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, DLC, downloadable content on Xbox Live. We would do the translation of the DLCs. Some of the projects I'm working on, we do the DLCs along with the main game because they get released so soon. Localization of demos, downloadable add-ons if there's clothes or something for your avatar, whatever happens to be, market material. And then we would do a post-mortem. So that's basically looking back on the whole pre-production, production to now, see how we did, what went wrong, what was good, translator feedback, vendor feedback, feedback from the PM, for me, from the testers as well, from audio, pros and cons. So obviously cons, what did we do really bad? Can we, you know, fix that for the future? Can we is there a tool to automate this? And also then build a relationship with the developer studio. So if you know you've been with them for maybe 6 months working on a game, and you're building that relationship. So this is what we did well. You know, maybe in the future could you provide us with this? It would make our job a lot easier. You know, save you money. So yeah, it's a pretty important phase. So then software we use, loads. Okay, so internally we would use, well, it's not necessarily internally for Lock Studio because our translation vendors use it. So Lock Studio is basically a translation platform tool that we use. Anybody familiar with it? I see heads. A couple. Like it? No? No. You do? So it's a pretty old piece of software. It was developed around the time of like Windows 98, Windows 2000. It's capable of some pretty cool stuff, but what I use it for is just basically EV management. Source control, Visual Studio, Team Foundation, Source Depot. Source Depot is it's a similar version of that. Used to be Visual Source Safe, we used before VSDF. So when we say source control, for me anyway, what it means is just EDB management. So as EDBs come back in, we'll update that. It means that the guys in Tokyo can pull our EDBs, update them for us, generate out the target files. They can do all that and then they can re-upload them. It means also reversion then. So if something was to go wrong or a bug has been introduced, I can then look at the previous one and see what was the translation, why was it changed, you know, that sort of thing. So bugs, Product Studio. So Alan's going to talk more about that later. That's our database for storing bugs. The platforms we work on, so games Windows Live, Xbox 360 XDKs. So that's what we would use to take screenshots and stuff and run the games on the dev machines. Visual Studio obviously for creating tools, writing scripts. And then external ones, we have Photoshop for any graphic localization needs done. Layered, obviously, because it'd be a nightmare not to. WinRAR, compression, it wins it. Beyond Compare is, I couldn't live without it basically. It's a comparison tool, so it can compare file structures, files themselves, and it means that we can look at the US, look at the translated, and make sure the only thing we've changed is the text, so we haven't changed their structures, anything else hasn't changed. And Trados is another platform for localization. So we have a couple of custom tools. Most of these were created in Dublin or Tokyo too. So Jigsaw is for voiceover. So it works with the spreadsheets or a database format, depending on what it gets. What it does is it'll convert it into a lock-friendly XML format that we would use, and it will split it up into maybe different characters the different chapters to make it easier to localize. So then that XML file generated from Jigsaw goes into Lock Studio and gets translated. Okay. After translation, then we can use the translated XML files back into Jigsaw, and they can then generate the scripts that get sent out to the studios. Then it's also able to handle updates. So during the recording, if the director or someone makes a change to it, makes a change to the translation, it's easy with Jigsaw to filter that change back in. And then if there's changes to the sources, the source US, it can create a subset script file that can go back out for recording, so it'll only contain the updates. We also have XBlaster. It's a little tool for pulling all the translatable rich presence strings out of what's called a game config file. So for Xbox games, the likes of achievements, rich presence strings are all stored in this game config file, but there's a lot of other stuff stored in there. So we use this little tool, pulls it out, lock-friendly format, and then we use it then to inject the translations back in. Then we have different parser tools. So Lock Studio is obviously one database format, but you would attach it to different parsers. So if your source file is in XML, then you use an XML parser, or it's HTML parser. For like ResX, DLL files, you would use a managed code parser. And then we have different parsing tools for spreadsheets. So it's an XLS to XML converter. Again, I keep saying XML because that's the best format for us to work with. It's the most easy read. We also then have Subtitle Creator. It's a tool for creating subtitles for videos. It was actually used in Alan Wake for transcribing video onto the disc. Then we have XSwitch, so that's a nifty little tool. It's used for quickly setting Xbox language on your Xbox, creating package builds, reflashing the Xbox, stuff that's really helpful to testers, isn't it? We have then different script batch files, so that's just little loose scripts for automation that maybe you personally use for your files or the engineers will use. So the big thing for us in Dublin one is that we would handle all the Indian languages. So we have to be able to scale from maybe a game with 5 languages. You'll be working on one game's 5, the other one's 18, 22. And you have to be able to do them at the same level. So you create scripts and just the automate stuff.
Do you provide these tools for your vendors or?
No, these scripts would be basically for source files. So the vendors see the translations in Lock Studio in a nice sort of spreadsheet format. The scripts are for us to get them in there and get them back out of there if we need to, or sometimes just simple scripts that overnight to copy files from one place to the other to save us doing it in the morning. Just things that make our job a bit quicker. When you could be working on any 3 or 4 games at one go, and if you have these scripts to back you up, it saves you time. XML Reader. So XML Reader links in with Jigsaw. It reads the Jigsaw XML file and then can link to the audio files. So you can review both the content of the VO script alongside listening to the WAV file. And so you mismatch verification, content verification, and it's all outside the build. So you can do it you don't have to wait for someone to package the audio in the build. You can do it there and then. And then Lock Sheriff's the new one we have. There's a thing called lock ver rules we use, lock verification. So we would bake these lock ver rules in the REDB that would prevent translators from breaking something. So if there's an escape sequence or %S placeholder sequences, we would put lock ver rules in to make sure that the translation contains that placeholder and I haven't took it out. So it saves bugs being entered down the line if we can make sure the translators don't break the strings. So Lock Sheriff, basically, it's a little tool to help us do that, because in Lock Shield it's not really very friendly. Any questions on the software? Okay.
These talk about XML files, are these vanilla XML files, or is it your own kind of flavor?
We do have a format that when I refer to friendly XML, there's one format I have in mind, and it would be, you would have one root. Is there any markers? No. Okay. So yeah, so you would have your root. You'd have your root string. So that would contain all your strings, and you would have them all in there, and they would have an ID, the text, and what we call a lock comment. So that's instruction. So we have parsers that read this. So you would have a string in there, and it automatically pulls the ID. It'll pull the source text and the instruction. So that's what when I refer to lock friendly, I mean that kind of format.
And would that comment contain just, comment, or could contain this, like, previous translation if you've done?
Yeah, you can put anything into there. So it's text field. We can also put in there lock variables. We can bake them in. But that's not a file that the translator sees. That's something that we would create, and then it gets imported through the parser tool in the Lock Studio. So the more we can put in that there, the more that's put in the Lock Studio, the better for the translator, because they'll see a better overview. Okay, so our challenges okay, so developers, not all of them, but some of them, don't know very much about localization. And they have their own priorities, let's face it. Their priority is to get the game, whatever part there is, the graphics, the engine, the script, whatever it happens to be. Sometimes localization can be an afterthought that happens, whoops, we kind of forgot about that. So, like I said, try and get in there early. Upstream engagement is very important. So if we can educate them, as if we can look straight away at the ideas for the game and say, that UI is very, very cramped. You're not going to fit a German translation in there at all. Text is not resourced in valid format, so I've mentioned that numerous times. So it's just they don't think when they generate their scripts or their source files. They're not thinking about that. They're just thinking about I need to read this file. My game needs to read this file. So we try and educate them. What to use. Maybe use resx format or use an XML file. And it makes your life and our life easier. But sometimes the game engines that they use. Could be old game engines that are specific files that they require, and then we work around that. Text is not split or logically grouped, so like I said, with recording scripts, it's okay because it's maybe line by line or chapter by chapter, character by character. In the game, it's not. You can have UI text that's all over the place. So you will have maybe the menu screen and like credits, and those strings are all over the place. And so if they can logically split them, give them a name. Makes the translator's life a lot easier, and mine actually as well. Code page is not supported. That's another thing. So they have to think about fonts. So what's supported in English is grand, but if you want your game to be released in Greece in the Greek language, you're going to need to start thinking about other fonts or what you're going to do. Hard-coded text, obviously, that's a big no-no. Sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask about the code pages. Are you talking about Windows 2098 type encoding pages?
Yeah, like Windows 1251 and that sort of thing.
Does that mean you're not using Unicode?
They don't always use it, no.
Wow.
This is what I mean by they don't think about that. So they'll store their strings in ASCII. And the thing with Xbox as well is it's not like Windows. So, for the game that we had to work with, the Xbox has its little keyboard, and we had to then, the font that they were using didn't support the characters in that language, and we had to bake those characters into a custom font and create it.
But I mean, what encoding then is used?
Depends on the game. It's not always Unicode.
So you can't have multiplayer games with text exchange, or?
What do you? Sorry. Say that again?
So are we talking about multiplayer games, network games even?
No, I'm just talking about the how the text is stored, how it's handled in game, and how it's pushed by a server. I'm not sure how they work with that. But for us getting the different text out, sometimes it's in ASCII, but we would then need to hand it back in Unicode. So we need to work with them to make sure what code pages are they using to read and get these into the game. Obviously in the game that's a well thought out process, but between source and translation. Sometimes we get ASCII files and we can't hand them back ASCII files. We have to hand them back Unicode or 121, 1251, you know, that kind of thing. That's what I mean. Does that answer your question?
I'm so surprised, I'm not sure.
Alan might
Probably not.
It's not something I've had a lot of trouble with, but it can be a challenge. It's not a big one, you know, but if it's not, it's something that can happen, and code pages is a problem. Then obviously concatenation as well, so that's, you know what that means. The translators, developers will store, I think it's maybe a good idea to save on translation. They store the string once and then use it many times, and obviously that doesn't work. We have made it work in some games. It was Dungeon Siege. We created a meta language, so they had like a word like broken sword of light, and that was stored in three different strings, and they wouldn't budge from it. It was too late in the day for them to worry about it. So basically, we had to create a meta language of the different masculine, feminine, masculine, singular, plural, feminine, and then the game would mix and match which one it needed. So yeah, we can handle it, but if you can stay away from it, that's great. Constant updates. So that's like I was saying, we have our EDVs out for translation, or we're locked for fixing bugs, and every day the developers sending us new updates. So like the games that I worked on, the day before the game is supposed to be sent out for certification, we're still getting source updates, and we just can't, it's not feasible to hand back, especially if it's a big update, to hand back that quickly. Obviously build stability, sometimes we're working with builds that don't work. Translators are asking for context, but we can't actually get the game to work. We just have the source files, have to translate them blind. UI design is not designed correctly, so no room for expansion. There's sometimes it's the developer's call. They will just say no, and just truncate it. There's nothing we can do. We have no more room, whatever it happens to be, or text within graphics. If they're putting text in their embedded graphics, that's just a nightmare for us. And then sometimes no access to developers or even builds. So we just have no communication with developers. Developers don't have time to communicate with us. Maybe it's a small studio or even a big studio and there's so much to do. One of the examples the engineer gave me was one of the halos was localized without even seeing the build. We weren't allowed to see it. All we had was some screenshots, and you had to localize the game blind basically. But that's just how Bungie, that's how they work. So there's not much we can do. We can try and push them, but at the end of the day, it's their call.
That's really surprising because I thought that before when you spoke about the communication with the developer, I was like, yeah, right, Microsoft, so they answered you. And I thought it always happened.
It doesn't always work that way, no. It would be nice if they listened to us, but like I said, they have their own priorities, and we're constantly nagging them about localization, and they're trying to get an entire game out.
Getting the answers 3 months after the game has been released. Oh,
Yeah.
nice, let's make it.
Exactly. So it's, yeah, like sometimes it depends on the developer. Some studios are a real pain to work with, and that's, you just know it. You know it going into the game. You know it's just going to be a nightmare to work with. And then in other cases, some of them are they're more than accommodating. At the end of the day, some of them, that's their baby, like was mentioned before. They want to make sure that it's great in every market, and they'll answer your questions, and they'll be on the all hours of the night on emails helping you out. Just depends who you get. So recommendations. So I've been harping on basically engage us earlier on. The earlier on we are involved in the game design or the game, the ideas around it, then we can think of long ahead on. Talk about the source formats, talk about UI expansion, so the developers are thinking about it while they're developing the game rather than after it's already been developed, because normally it's too hard to change it then. So yeah, change is not possible. It means quality is compromise. Well, what can we do? It's too late. I don't have the time. I have another thing to develop. I can't be making your UI bigger. But the translators can't come up with a string any smaller, truncate it. And it's unfortunate, but if we were to be involved earlier on, this might not happen, because we would have said, well, that's going to be a big strain. You know, that kind of thing. So obviously design the UI for lock, allow for UI expansion, no concatenate strings at all. So flexible build environment as well. Allow us to create our own builds, if it's at all possible. If it's not, that's fair enough. But it makes our job easier if we can create our own builds and test bugs straight away without having to wait for the builds to be generated in the States or whatever, and it's sent to us. It's not always possible, especially in the game. So make sure your content is locked down as much as possible. Try not to update the day before cert. It's very hard. But obviously that's never going to happen. You're never going to be code your content complete on the date. It never really works. But as much as you can get on that date, that means then, because we don't have a lot of time for testing, it means anything after that there, you can start to eat into test time. And it means there's translation going on while there's testing going on, which is a nightmare. And then again, formats, use a lock-friendly format. Ask us, what should we store our text in? We'll tell you. If we see the files earlier on, we can say this isn't going to work. Some of the files that we have would be line-based, notepad or text files. So you can't put a line break in there because that breaks the functionality. How are you going to handle line breaks? Are you going to give it IDs? Some of the files I work with don't have IDs. I don't know how the developers reference them in the game, but somehow they do. But so the thing doesn't have an ID, and the program that we use is ID based, and it means any changes that are made, if a line's deleted, everything shifts up, and it's just a nightmare. So give your strings IDs, meaningful IDs at that. Separate your strings from the code as well, obviously. And then last one. So there's a few lock technologies that we've developed here in Dublin. So Xbox Language Interface Pack, that's what Xbox is. And it basically means that the game can be released and the language can be released afterwards. So there's a standard structure, file folder and file structure that you adhere to. And you don't need to change the code. It's like Windows, where you can go on and download Japanese for your Windows if you want. Like it's the same kind of idea. You can go on to the Xbox Live Market and download your game in Danish or whatever you want. So it kind of gives it's nicer for us then. It means we're not as pushed. We could push it out then, translate the version. But if it needs to be sim shipped, like Jason mentioned, then we can do that. Font cache, mainly used for Eastern Asian fonts. So that's where we'll cache the fonts that the game uses. It's to free up memory. We don't need to load all of the Asian characters. XLOC format, that's APIs that we use for different formats, so currencies in different markets, and what the date should look like. Just stuff like that to help developers that they can use in the games. And then obviously XML Reader and Jigsaw, which manages translation and verification of voiceover. That's it for me, waffling. Any questions?
You said that sometimes you use pseudo translation, but not always. Like, how do you decide, and is it not always effective, or why are you not using it?
For the projects that I've worked on recently, I haven't used it, and personally it was because of the schedule. The testing wasn't going to happen for a while anyway. We had time to get it localized. We didn't need to do so that's sort of locked up. We're actually working on machine translation, so that we could machine translate it, get it into the build, and identify then strings that are hard coded. But obviously we're not going to use that to ship it, but it's just so that we can see the UI expanding. How is it going to handle that language? So we're working on that there, and then that would get sent out and reviewed and updated and retranslated again. But yeah, in some of the projects we haven't used it.
Sometimes it's down to the stability of the builds. You don't have a build that actually plays. So.
Yeah.
But does Log Studio have it built in?
Pseudo lock?
Yeah, it has a pseudo translation function. Yeah.
But like Jason says, we could pseudo lock it, but we can't get it in the build because the build doesn't work. So we can't test it.
About the software you use, do you work with any terminology extraction tool? to build like the glossary before?
We have terminal. I don't think, to my knowledge, I don't think there's tools. It's not like Windows or Office, which would run through, geopolitical tools and all that there. But we do have terminology and how certain things should be said in certain languages.
Like, when you get a new game, that you think extraction or words that are repeated often, so that
Yeah.
it's not that before you have.
We have glossaries, so we can see it.
Glossaries, actually, to make a glossary, like the first step.
Oh, make it in the first instance.
It's, yeah, that means when you get like a new game, completely new content, then you run it through the system to see which words are coming up like a lot, like I don't know, 150 times, so that you can make a glossary before you start, anything like that?
No, typically we would compile a list of glossary words that are used across all of the Xbox platform. And that is very
not for a game, specific game, let's say that has.
not specifically, well, there's a terminology list.
Yeah, terminology list, but it
Yeah.
wouldn't be really specific to gamers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Some things will get down from the developers, say, Bungie, we want this said in a certain way, or it has to be retained that way, but
Okay, but
not
it's
that I've seen.
part of your workflow that you put that in the log kit for the vendors.
Yeah.
What do you want from the localization company? Well, from the language man? What is the ideal profile of the good localization company?
That's quite a question now.
Well, I do understand you educate them and so on, but still.
Yeah, well-
Little mistakes or something.
To be honest, I haven't personally had any trouble where I've had to say, God, I wish they'd do that, or I wish they'd do this. I guess they have to be creative, because, like I've mentioned before, there's times where the string has to be 11 characters long and we'll figure it out. Otherwise, it's going to be truncated, and we don't want that. So the translators have to be very creative. Also, when it comes to, you have to be very open. We don't necessarily have context to give you. There's nothing we can do about it. If we get the context, we will give you, and anything that we can give you in the lock kit, we will. Other than that, you're kind of. But we will help you along the way, as much as we can do. And translators, they'll send their queries in, and we try and answer them. And if we can't, we'll send them to the developer, and they answer them, and we get them back. Other than that.
I think one of the things, just to say, ultimately, obviously, quality is really important, and flexibility and efficiency. We need teams of translators that can actually move as the project does. As Gary has said, and I said earlier on, one of the things we're dealing with is updates all the time. So we're looking for people who are flexible, but also we're looking for people who know the industry.
Yeah.
That aren't just people who try to translate, in the sense that they are actually specializing in an area, a niche. Because gamers have a language, they have, there's terminologies in there, there's colloquialisms, so it's important that we're focusing on people who are aware of that.
Yeah, because it's very different to localize an Office file, open menu, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
The strings, the storyline can have quirks that go with the franchise, or certain developers have certain little quirks that they put into their games, and obviously if the person is a gamer, they'll do that, and they'll try and portray that in their market as best as they can.
And it even goes as far as actually searching out for specific translators for particular types of or genres of game. So, you could be reaching out to someone who's into sport, a particular sport, do you know what I mean? And they have that terminology and that whether car racing or something like that. It's all relevant. Golf, for example. So you are reaching out for their knowledge as well as their actual translation.
Like for the Forza franchise, if we had translators that were into their cars, like sometimes we'd get queries, what does this string mean? It's the make of a car, or it's the model of a car. It's not their fault. It might not be, those kind of cars might not be available in their market. But if they, it would help if they were car savvy and they knew, kilometers per hour and all that kind of stuff and what it should look like in their market. And this is a make of a car.
It's a huge area for terminology, that whole car thing, because,
Yeah, because it has to be very specific,
yeah.
you know, because the car makers calm down all the cars. You know. If there's any more, we
Just one.
Yeah.
Publishers, unit publishers,
Yeah.
developers are essentially trying to get into the Microsoft ecosystem, whether it's Xbox or games for Windows Live. And there's quite some strict certification in put there, right?
Yeah.
So how is it that you don't kind of say, okay, we want your files in this format, we want this?
That's an ideal world that happens. You see, because
I know that you've got, the Bungies and
Yeah.
or had Bungies or whatever. You can't really say that because they can write their own ticket or whatever. But
Exactly.
for the smaller ones, can you not say, look, you want to get into?
yeah, some of the smaller ones are most willing to adapt because they want to learn. Some of them are brand new, especially with the boom of phones. Brand new developers sometimes by themselves who don't have a clue about that and are going, you tell me, I haven't a clue. But in terms of certification, what you need to remember from my point of view is I don't necessarily work on files that are in the game. So these could be files that are extracted out from their developers' tools and they just push them out tabbed in the format. And I have to hand back in that format because then that goes into their tool, which goes into the game. So it doesn't necessarily, certification would go through the game and stuff, but source files can be generated anyway. One of the games I'm working on is a spreadsheet. You know, and that's a nightmare for updates, especially if they're sending us updates and we're trying to compare it, that kind of thing. So it doesn't really come into play with source files that we translate. That's why we have to engineer solutions for. No more? Yes?
Yes. What's your attitude towards UGC? First of all, crowdsourcing, user-generated content. First of all, crowdsourcing, and secondly, modding. But I presume that modding is more for PC games.
What's our view on it?
Yeah, that just
Well, crowdsourcing, and I sort of touched on this a little bit earlier, it's just so hard to control. I'm not saying it would be ruled out, but when we're talking about IPs and games, there's such a danger for us for content to get out. So
You could develop toolkits, like for mods, instead of like
true.
let them hack.
Yeah, but there's still a risk of content getting out once it's in the hands of a number of people who haven't registered, officially to a project. There's a risk of content getting out, and as much as it can be used in some areas, I don't think it can be used at the moment anyway in the area of games. Unless it's controlled, or it's not important that we.
I know crowdsourcing probably is starting to be looked at for games that have already released. So if the game is already released, but the developer wants to get into different markets, like some of the Far Eastern countries or whatever. Crowdsourcing is starting to be looked at in one place with some of the developers. But a lot of the titles are huge in terms of content, so it's like trying to release something within a schedule where you would be relying on crowdsourcing is pretty difficult.
And then you would think of how do we review that? How to review the content that's came in, because we don't do that. Our vendors they manage the review and make sure that it's in their best interest to hand us back something that's quality, because they want to maintain a good relationship with us. So with crowdsourcing, we don't have the resources to do that.
And ultimately the translators are held accountable for any quality issues.
And it's the same for mods. So
For
mods. Modding.
Forge and Halo.
Okay, probably with the platform, it's not so evident. Anyway, many games that offer modding have been very successful, like Little Big Planet or Counter-Strike. So
Something to think about anyway. It's well,
Yeah.
currently what we.
no, that was just a question.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'd be curious to hear what language is actually released at the same time, or where they actually deltas, if they have deltas. I mean, it's that whole discussion, ultimately, from our point of view, just boils down to whether it's released or not.
The crowdsourcing anyway is usually implemented for secondary markets that you don't plan to localize anyway.
Okay.
So you just
So, yeah,
resort
so-
to this for.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So that, yeah, as Alan said, that, I mean, it is something that we would consider after.
Okay, so I think we're okay for time. I'm just going to show you a quick demo of Lock Studio. Okay, so you can all see that all right? Okay, so this is the wonder that is Lock Studio. This is the tool that the vendors would use to localize the text. So I'll open up. This is an EDB from Joyride, the Connect game. So you would have here your different workspaces. So this is where the files. Most games will have a couple, but for simplicity, I just kept the one. And then you would have here. This is the main area for translation. So you would have a resource ID here, the source, the translation. You would have a previous source, so if the strings change, what was it beforehand? And then instructions, and there's no instructions in this one, but the instructions would be in here. And it would maybe say some context, or this string means this. Or if there's a placeholder, it'll say %s means money, currency. Then we would have modified date modified by, so that we can track if a change happened, who made it, and when it happened. And there's custom fields and a few other ones. We can lock down strings as well. Stuff that doesn't need localized, just to make sure that the translators don't do anything with it. So you were saying about pseudo-localization. So it's an add-in we have, we can apply to the entire database. So yeah, so you can see there, it extends the string on, gives it about 30% increase in size. Didn't actually, that wasn't the EDB I meant to do it in. I meant to do it in this one. Because the actual character sets weren't set in that EDB, that's why I didn't change any of the symbols. So I'll do it in this one. Let's see. So, as you can see there, I'll bring this across a bit. You can see how it's changed, it's replaced the characters. And that way we can lash that into the game. And I don't think I can make the screen bigger, sorry. We can lash that into the game, and that checks both the strings extension, and also then checks that the characters are supported with the font. And that's if we have a working build, that's what they'll do first. We'll then put those we'll generate that out, put them into the build, and then run the build. And it means straight away we can identify problem strings. We can identify obviously characters that aren't supported by the font that the game is using, and also then hard-coded strings. If there's strings in there in English, it means something's gone wrong, or it's not in the source file, or what's going on. So that's a quick way for us to do that there. Pretty handy. Okay, so the source file now, I've purposefully picked a nice one. So yeah, this is a nice source file. This is one that we created from the Joyride source file. So as you can see here, it's logically split. We have the string, we have ID and the text. Like I said, there's no instructions in this one. I couldn't find any but it's split up logically into the different sections. So it means the text within the EDB is grouped to make it easier to translate. So what we can do is, let's see, so we modify the source file, and then go back here. So if I was to say localized. So I've modified the source file. So they say the developer has given us a new file, and this is how we would update it. So we would just update the source file. It'll take the new source file and update its internal database. So it takes into consideration what has been locked, what's been localized, what hasn't been localized. So you see there's different colours down the side. So blue means it hasn't been localized, green means it has, and red means it's been updated. So I purposely set that string to localized so that it would be red files. So that's how we handle updates. And it means then the translators can see straight off what needs to be done, what has been translated and what hasn't. And we have various filters that you can either create or there's default ones in there. So if I want to see what needs to be translated, I just apply the filter and it takes away everything else. It's just like a normal filter in a spreadsheet, shows us just what needs to be translated. From that then, we can generate statistics so that we can see the word count. So this is probably far too small for you to see. But it just basically goes through the EDB and identifies what needs localized, counts the amount of words. For changes, the translator can go in and actually see what has changed. So I don't know if you can see that. So basically the word was loaded and I put the word test underneath after it. So the EDB can figure out that test is the only word that needs changed there. So what we would do, it's called an update effort. So to update that string, it requires an effort of one word to update it. And that's how we get our statistics. So we have a to-be translated, there's 55 words that needs translated, and one needs updated. And that's how we would filter that back to the PM, and that's how lock costs are worked out. Any questions so far? No? Okay, so we can then generate.
I do have a question.
Go.
I saw some research about some XML Microsoft format that allowed the we call them binaries to be attached. So you could see sometimes it would have the string and attach a screenshot where you can see the string in visual context. Is that something you do with this tool? Or?
No, that's not something we do with this tool.
Okay.
I'm not too sure of the format that you're talking about.
LCX?
LC. That's actually LCX. I'm pretty sure there's a newer version of this tool. We don't really work with DLLs. This program is capable of bringing in a UI and resizing the UI and all that there. But for games, it's on an Xbox. There's no point. But LCX is a newer version of this program that was built specifically for, I think, Windows 2000 or something. So yes, you can bring in let's say Notepad and drag it out and make UI elements bigger. I think, is that what you're talking about? Being able to do that?
Well, I was thinking of, I haven't used the software, I just know that you have the possibility and that it helps you, it's visual context. What you're talking about reminds me more of something like Pasolo or Catalyst. But
well, there's the LCX, I think that's the file name. I think it's LCX, it could be LCL, I'm not sure. But yeah, you can pull in DLL files and it'll render them, and you can change them there, and then you can resize dialogues, translate it there, see what it looks like on the screen. But for games, it's of no use to us. So that's why we use this is version 4.8. There's no point in us updating and training translators because it's of no benefit to us. So I can just translate one of these strings, and we generate it out. This will generate the source file for us. And you can see that I've created NL, and if I go in there, my translation's there. So you can, I'll compare it instead. I'll show you. So this is where we would use beyond compare to compare the two files. So you can see EM has been changed, and you can see there. So that was the original source text, and that's what I changed it into. So we can see that by using Lock Studio, we're not changing the developer source format. We're just literally updating the translatable text. We would use that then to go through and make sure everything is fine. So the other thing would be, will be lock verification rules. So if I can just, yeah. So lock verification rules are rules that we bake into the EDB, which is what this is. Bake into the EDB to make sure that parts strings aren't broken. We can use a list of them, so say /n, %s, whatever the developers dream of. We can use regular expressions as well if it's more complicated. So like this here, we have a lock ver rule for /n. So if I was to run, verify the rules, everything verifies fine, there's no errors there at all. This is the output window, by the way. If I was to take /n out of the string, by accident, of course, we can do it first, and verify the rules again, you can see there we now have an error. So it says target string blah 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 is not valid. String must contain /n. So that's a quick way for us to put those rules in, send it out for translation, and just run them. We actually ask the vendor to run them themselves, rather than us doing it. So they just highlight the whole thing, verify lock rules, and if anything flags up as an error, they just go to it, it tells them what's wrong, and they go, oh whoops, I took that out, I'll put it back in. So it means we don't get it, run it, and have to send it back. We ask them to do it themselves. And they don't worry about the lock ver rules themselves. We put them in, they just hit run, and anything that flags up is normally self-explanatory like that. The string must contain that /n card. So yeah, that solves a lot of lock bugs that might creep up. If we can preempt them as much, put in as many lock ver rules. That's why we've actually spent time to develop a tool to make it easier, because adding them via Lock Studio isn't always the easiest way. So we've created, one of the engineers on our team created a tool to add these in. So the more we add in, the more foolproof we make the EDB. It makes translation a lot easier, reduces lock bugs, and helps the vendors, because that means that they know that they can't break a certain string. So you have then glossaries. So the EDB stores a glossary as it's going along. So here's the glossary here. It's pretty much the same format, but it stores the source and the translation. And from that we can then auto-translate another EDB. So this is Joyride. Say Joyride 2 comes along, a bunch of the strings are all the same. There's no point retranslating that. Why don't we just use this? So we would save out this glossary file and import it into the new EDB. And that way we would be able to auto-translate a bunch of strings. And then, so parsers as well. This program uses an XML parser. But we can develop our own. We have enough now, we don't really need to. But if one was to come along in a new format, we would develop the parser, and Lock Studio is capable of using it. And that way we can fire any file into it. There's INI, there's INF, there's HTML parsers, there's XML parsers, DLL, ResX, there's loads. So whatever format we can pretty much handle. If we don't, we'll create a tool to turn it into a format that's handleable in this program. Yeah, I think we've 10 minutes.
So the format used internally is this local XML format?
It's the preferred one. It's kind of like that there, that format.
The file that you showed us before.
Yeah, that's what we would endeavour the file to look like that.
Is it the schema somewhere, or just in internal Microsoft?
No, that's internally for us. That's the kind of file that we would like. But if the developers give us a line-based text file, we'll try and turn it into that. It makes our life easier to handle XML. Scripts handle XML. It's much easier to code in XML and read it and write it than it is to worry about text files and all that sort of stuff. So we can get into this format, great. If not, we'll ourselves turn it into in an intermediate stage, and then we'll write it so it'll be injected back into your format and give it to the developers. So yeah, it's just a string ID and a text inside a tag. That's really it. That's the schema. So then the other thing is machine translation. It's one thing we're working on, pulling from the Bing API, Bing Translator API. So the way that we can translate our pseudo lock in here we're going to create an add-in where it will machine translate it. So whatever, based on the language, it will go up to bing.com/translate, whatever it is, and pull the translation for it and put it in here. And it means then we would have a better build to verify. We can stick it into the build. It's better than the pseudo one, because well, obviously the strings aren't going to be 100% perfect, but it's good for testing purposes. Test to make sure that the strings are, all the localizable stuff is being pulled out in the R file, and UI resizing. So yeah, that's one thing we're working on. Any questions?
What file formats does the Beyond Compare work with except for XML? Or
Everything under the sun. It's
It's
lifesaver.
It's like two Excel sheets.
Yeah.
Two Microsoft.
Yeah.
Waves, files.
Yeah.
And that's the internal code you developed.
No. It's Beyond Compare is another. We balanced. Yeah, it's Scooter software. Yeah, it's not really.
It's off the shelf.
Yeah. We do have a tool internally called WinDiff. It's old though. It's Beyond Compare. It's great. That's what we use.
So you're going to integrate Bing. Does this have TM integrated? Is that translation memory integrated?
It stores translation memories in glossaries. Yeah. But the machine translation wouldn't be for to release the game. We wouldn't machine translate it. It's something that we're just looking into, we're playing around with to see. Like machine translation is used across Microsoft for other things, support content or whatever. But for games, it's not something we would use we wouldn't release a game. It's just basically, it's another form of pseudo lock that we can use. It's not built into this yet. I'm working on it. There's a question, yes?
I was curious, you mentioned the Bing Translate API. Is
Yeah.
that a public API? Or
It is, yeah.
So it's not just for internal users?
No. It's the same. There's MSDN documentation up there. You can use HTTP, Ajax, SOAP.
Do you have to be a Microsoft developer on Development?
You can go up there and you get yourself an app ID. You sign in and Windows Live ID. It'll give you an app ID, and then in your code you supply that. And you can, there's a number of supported languages, and then you can translate string by string, or you can send an array of strings and it will fire them back.
Interesting, because I don't know if you knew, but just, I think it was yesterday, Google announced
Google's
they're discontinuing
they're
their Translate
discontinuing.
API.
Yeah, they're actually discontinuing quite a lot. I only got to read it briefly, but the translate one was the one that stuck out, because there's a lot of programs I know use it and aren't going to be able to use it anymore. There's a big push inside Microsoft to start using this machine translation stuff, just as a cheap way to quickly translate stuff, not to release it, but just internally. So I don't think they're gonna deprecate the API anytime soon.
Could I ask a question? How many translators here use auto translate or machine translation? Is it commonly used in the industry?
More and more, yeah, in certain sectors.
Yeah. And would you see it being a benefit to do machine translation and then review it? To get to the point. Would you see that as being a quicker way rather than?
If it's a well-trained engine
Okay.
that's trained on your domain or material,
Yeah.
then it can actually be quite efficient and create a lot of consistency, which
Okay.
can be quite time-consuming for a human.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it really depends on the area. In other areas, it could be quite inefficient. You'd be spending more time fixing it than actually.
Yes.
My guess is it's only worthwhile for a single few languages. No, sorry, what's your language that you've been?
Norwegian.
Norwegian, okay. My guess is that anything beyond the most voluminous languages, maybe.
Yeah.
Because when we're talking about the free ones, because if you work on a big company and a lot of data, you train your
Yeah, you
own
train it.
system.
Yeah. That's actually what we're working
No,
on.
but that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're training it because basically the Bing API as it stands has a general domain. We're trying to recycle stuff that we've worked on in the past to train it for games. So at the minute it's not really great at games because games are very context based. But we're going to train it and see how that goes. But yeah, at the minute it's a general domain that kind of works best for people just want to translate a few things or get a rough translation. But if we train it with game data that we have over the years, then it'll get a lot better. And like you said, there'll be more time spent, less time spent fixing it. the more we get trained.
We actually have kind of an unconventional application for MT. We do use it a lot, and we're a game localization company, but we don't use it to actually translate content. We use it if we're reviewing or editing some work from a translator, and we're trying to find maybe another way to render the text, maybe come up with something more creative. We just throw it at machine translation, see what it comes back with. Usually it's something totally crazy, but it can trigger some interesting ideas, and we can use that actually to incorporate some of those ideas into the actual text. So that's one way to be using it.
Do you use any translation memory standards or localization standards?
Yeah,
Open standards?
we would have terminology guides.
TBX?
How are they scanned? I think there's Word documents. We have glossaries, not studio glossaries, but we also have like terminology guidelines. Like the likes of Xbox Live has to be written in a specific way, and they would come down from powers that be. We would have various other translation guidelines, like in this language the date looks like this, and we have APIs that developers you can use, and we can plug into like Lionhead and say, look, if you're not sure, plug into this API and find out. So yeah, we would have a lot of that sort of stuff. But along the years, it builds up, and the terminology standards. When it comes to cert, the games, a lot of terminology would be checked. So if it's Xbox Live, the live part of it is lowercase, that fails certification. So a lot of those things are built into when the game is certified. But the developers will be well aware of them beforehand, so that it wouldn't break certification.
Is there a reason why your studio is not publicly available? No.
It's an internal Microsoft tool. I don't think it's for public consumption.
No, it's not.
No, it's
I don't think there's any.
it's not. No, I don't think there's any plan to either. It's just like a lot of the internal tools that we would use.
Used by the translation vendor.
Oh yeah, we would give it to them to use, but it's not like I don't think a translation company could set themselves up and start using it. I think it's pretty much you're using this because you're working with us, and that's our tool. I don't know how other publishers would work. If they probably have their own tools. Like Apple, maybe whatever translation way they have. Facebook have their own different ways of translating. This is just the one we use. Albeit it's very old, but it does the job. And we add into it as much as we can to try and fix some of the quirks and annoying bits with it. But it's a pretty good program. Pretty solid.
You just review what the translator says, it's probably better than translated other things, so why it's not available?
Yeah. Well, you see, from my point of view, I don't know what vendors and translators think of it. They could think it's good. I don't know, but from what I work with it, it can be a bit of a pain. But I don't know from a translator's point of view. It's like anybody who uses what you do, if it's cool,
The general consensus is quite
quite good.
yeah.
That's good. Did I miss anything in the handbook? Okay, cool. I'll pass you over to Alan.